Yes, and I'm joined again in studio tonight by defense and government analyst for Haaretz, Amir Oren. Amir, welcome back.
Thank you.
And Dr. Emmanuel Navon, international relations expert. Good evening, Dr.
Good
Navon.
evening.
Well, Dr. Navon, let me begin with you. Eli Hohenberg in her report showed us Netanyahu's supposed rivals, that's Avigdor Lieberman and Yair Lapid. In a recent poll by an Israeli news channel, it was said that if elections in Israel were held today, the Likud party, the ruling Likud party, which Netanyahu leads, would drop in the number of seats, and Yair Lapid's party would rise. Are we looking really at a decline for Netanyahu at this point, or will he, as he always does, rise again?
Well, you know, it's hard to tell because people have been predicting the decline of Netanyahu for about 10 years, and he's been in power for accumulated 10 years at this point. And it reminds me of what the former Italian premier, Giulio Andreotti, used to say, that power only wears out those who don't have it. And so it looks like this formula works on Netanyahu. On the other hand, it seems that, 10 years in power, even if it's accumulated 10 years, it looks like there's a fatigue, there's a Netanyahu fatigue, even though he did win the elections a year ago. But it is true that we witnessed today a rise of the Yesh Atid party of Yair Lapid, even though historically, everything can change, but it's true that historically, until today, it's always either the Labour Party or the Likud that were able to form a coalition. Now, everything is possible, it might change, but it's true that until now, historically, these are the two parties that have always been the one forming a coalition.
And Netanyahu fatigue you're mentioning, and Amir, it does beg the question. 10 years have passed since he's in power. It really requires us to look, regionally speaking, what has he initiated that's a dramatic move during this decade?
Well, it's not really 10 years because 10 years have elapsed between the two periods, which comprise the first 3 and the current 7. In the clip that you showed, Netanyahu seemed to be having a good time. Apparently, he enjoys it. He could go on forever. A couple of years ago, he had an idea to combine the offices of president and prime minister. He wanted, after Shimon Peres, to be elected sort of an Erdogan in an Israeli format, in order for his wife to be the first lady, rather than Nechama Rivlin, as the case may be. And if you look at it as you asked regionally, there is no agenda. The only agenda is survival. He has managed that. He has survived for the last year or two, even though a day before the elections, and even on election day itself, he had the feeling that he was going to lose. And he recovered miraculously, as he sees it. And now there is no rival because the opposition leaders, which you showed, are not united. Now, there is one exception to the rule that Emmanuel just cited. Kadima, an offshoot of Likud, right, did win in 2006, right, when Netanyahu only got 12 seats. Right. Perhaps Yesh Atid or some other combination of a center party plus new people who are not yet in the political arena, perhaps they might take over from Netanyahu the leadership. In order for that, we must have an election, and it is not in the cards right now.
Well, Amir, speaking of survival, as you mentioned, we discussed earlier Meir Dagan, the late, now former chief of Mossad, and he, of course, had a complicated relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu. It seems that while looking at the relationship between Netanyahu and Dagan, it does beg the question at this point in his political career of how Netanyahu deals with opposition to his ideas, whether it's on the Iran deal or otherwise.
Yes, well, I think that when you look at the way Meir Dagan started criticizing Netanyahu, it's interesting because Meir Dagan was a member of Likud originally. He joined Likud in 2000, and then he was a very close advisor to Ariel Sharon. So it's not that Meir Dagan came from the left. He was very critical of Netanyahu's leadership, or rather lack thereof, and especially in the issue of the Iranian threat. And I think that it came from, when Meir Dagan was criticizing, it really came from an authentic place. Like he was really saying there's no leadership here. There's no decision-making. There's just meddling through. And this is really Netanyahu. His really political raison d'etre is political survival. And the truth is that he's really good at it, but at the expense of making actual decisions and always playing around. Now, part of the problem is also not only that the opposition is divided, but Netanyahu also has done a very good job eliminating any opposition in his own party until people just leave. And there are many potential leaders in the Likud that eventually left. Some of them stayed in politics, such as Moshe Kahlon, who started his own party. Others, like Gideon Sa'ar, took a break. But as I said, he's just very good at staying in power, and that's about it.
He's very good at staying in power. Amir, very briefly, your reaction?
The senior civil servants and military and security chiefs who see Netanyahu up close are, for some reason, against him. This was true in the 90s. It was true when Dagan was Mossad chief and Ashkenazi was chief of staff of the IDF. And the alliance of Shimon Peres, Meir Dagan, Gabi Ashkenazi, and Barack Obama managed to stop Netanyahu and Ehud Barak from bombing Iran.
Amir Oren and Dr. Emmanuel Navon, thank you very much for joining me for this. The lineup is done for tonight and the week. Join us again next week. Until then, have a good weekend.